Back here on CBS Sports HQ, we usually do mock draft Mondays, but we're going to make mock draft Wednesdays a thing because why not? Our NFL draft writer Josh Edwards just dropped a brand new mock. It's on CBSSports.com right now, by the way. He has Cam Ward going #1 overall to the Tennessee Titans. He has Shedeur going #3 overall to the Giants. Abdul Carter actually going #2 overall to the Browns. No quarterback there. And then Colorado two-way star Travis Hunter going to the Patriots. My beloved Jags getting some D-line help from Mason Graham. We need a lot of help. I'm a salty Jags fan throughout this entire show. But let's bring in Josh Edwards, Ryan Wilson, Mike Renner joining us here. We're going to go through the mock, talk about fits. But, Josh, the first thing that caught my eye when I'm looking at this mock, of course, we're talking about the quarterbacks potentially going 1-2 with Cam and Shedeur. But you have the Browns not going a quarterback route and taking Abdul Carter. And this is just a question for Josh, by the way. How can you see that playing out where they don't go a quarterback route, considering what we saw with Deshaun Watson, and they have Jameis still there, and not necessarily having a solid QB at the moment, but going with the Abdul Carter route for the draft? Just explain where you're at in this mock and making that pairing.
Yeah, I think some teams are going to view Shedeur Sanders differently than others, so to speak. I don't think that he's this bona fide first-round talent in this draft class, so I could conceivably see teams view him as not being a fit for them. So if you're Cleveland and you don't think that Sanders is your quarterback, then you have to go in another direction. And ultimately that leads us to Carter. It leads us to Travis Hunter Jr., the dual two-way player from Colorado. I went with Carter in this experiment. I've gone with Hunter in the past. I just think what we saw from Carter, through the college football playoffs, put him on the opposite side of Myles Garrett, allow him to rush the passer. I think that's a tantalizing possibility. I think that's something that Browns fans can be excited about. So I went in that direction this time, but I just, more than anything, want to prepare people with the idea that maybe it's not going to be quarterback 1 and 2.
You're preparing us. We had this big conversation about it before we came up, so thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah, totally. And Ryan, let's go to the #1 overall pick that Josh has. And of course, the Titans, the big news last week was that they got a GM, Mike Borgonzi. He is the guy. So now that begs the question, who are they going to take with that #1 overall pick? So, and Ryan, we talked about it. Cam Ward going there to Tennessee, and it does make a lot of sense. And we've talked about the situation. Maybe they'll get a bridge quarterback, but this, Ryan, seems like an obvious fit there.
Right, exactly, Jacqueline. I think this is one of the straightforward picks you make. Going back to our buddy Rick Spielman's first draft pick, he took Adrian Peterson, and that was a layup, and this feels like a layup in that sense, in that you need a quarterback. I'm sure Mike Borgonzi will come in and evaluate Will Levis from top to bottom and make an evaluation on where he fits into the Titans' plans. But the last 2 years would suggest that they may want to move on, and typically when the coach and now the GM aren't tied to the quarterback that they drafted or signed, they're more likely to move on than not. And we've talked Cam Ward to death in terms of all the things he brings on the field physically and his mental makeup and his leadership skills. But at the end of the day, you could have 21 Hall of Famers on your roster. If you don't have a quarterback, you're either going to go to the playoffs and lose, or you're not going to go to the playoffs at all and you'll be battling to even get to 500. So these are all the conversations they'll have. But Cam Ward, to me, feels like one of these layup picks you make if you're a team that desperately needs a quarterback and you have a new GM and a coach going into his second season that didn't draft this quarterback originally.
To echo what Ryan said, and Josh said a little bit earlier as well, I have a much higher grade on Cam Ward than I do Shedeur Sanders. I think it's not even close right now.
Wow.
And I think compared to last year, though, I don't even have Cam Ward with as high a grade as the guys we saw come off 1, 2, and 3. So it's not as good a quarterback class, and so that's why you can see maybe Shedeur falling down boards, because we saw people pass on, Michael Penix Jr. last year, Bo Nix, guys who turned out to be pretty darn good looking as rookies. So you don't always take him at the top of the draft. I think we've just become very accustomed to that. But Cam Ward is such a guy that I'm taking that #1 overall from the Tennessee Titans.
He just scares me with how chill he is. I know that's like his MO, but the way he just stands back there with no emotion, it makes me nervous. It's completely opposite of Shedeur Sanders and how he has sort of presented himself both as a player and as a personality. And we think about him going to the Giants, Josh, this is no surprise. He wore those Giants decorated cleats in his bowl game about a month ago. He even said, quote, "We know where we're going," and he's expecting it to be New York, Josh.
Yeah, it seems like he's courting the Giants as much as maybe they might be courting him. He's spent some time in the Big Apple recently, of course. I think he was courtside at a Knicks game, so there's some familiarity there. He played catch with Malik Neighbors. He's already getting familiar with his potential outlets there. So New York is a team that I think is going to be desperate to upgrade its quarterback position. Obviously, it did not work out with Daniel Jones. It did not work out with Drew Lock. So you have to go in a different direction. And I think Sanders is certainly a player that has a lot of confidence. He's somebody that has shown that the moment is not going to be too big for him. So now you throw him into the most criticized market in all of the NFL. I think he's somebody that can handle that type of pressure. And if you're a Giants fan, that gives you a little bit of reason to be excited for the 2025 season.
It's a great point.
Right, Josh. They need a quarterback, right? And that's the bottom line is, and Mike touched on it, is Shedeur QB1 in this draft class or last year's draft class? No, he's not. But he's probably, like I have him as a mid to late first round grade right now, and I have Cam a little bit higher than that. And these are the calculus that the teams are going to have to do in terms of trying to figure this thing out. The other thing is that fit matters, and I'll be saying that until the end of time. There's a reason Bo Nix had a ton of success, partly due to Bo Nix and what he brings to the table, but also because Sean Payton consistently put him in situations where he would have success. Didn't ask him to push the ball down the field a lot early in the season. Once he got more comfortable in that offense, he was able to do that a little more efficiently. And I think in Brian Dable, the big selling point of Brian Dable was what? Josh Allen in Buffalo. And we saw glimpses of that in year one with Daniel Jones, with not very many playmakers around Daniel Jones, and then the wheels seem to fall off. So if you're comfortable with Brian Dable being able to get the most out of Shedeur Sanders, I think you take him at 3, even if you have him graded as a mid to late first round pick, because once again, no quarterback, you're not going to win football games.
The one thing I worry about for Giants fans' sake is that they kind of have this now lame duck head coach and GM pairing that they need to save their jobs. And more often than not, the rookie quarterback doesn't do it. I think a lot of people got spoiled by last year's rookie class and the success of Jaden Daniels, success of Bo Nix. But more often than not, they look like Bryce Young, right? They don't turn out good year one, especially with kind of the talent the Giants have right now in the fold. So that's the only thing I worry about is them maybe saying, we're going to pass on this rookie quarterback class and maybe go trade for like a Derek Carr or something. Obviously not what I'd endorse, but very much could be an option for the Giants.
So you don't think any of the current quarterbacks on the Giants roster have a chance? Like not even Drew Lock?
I do not.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to put that out there.
Drew Lock was winning at the wrong time. All the Giants fans were like, dang, what's going on here? It seems like there are just endless teams that need a quarterback, at least towards the top there. And the Raiders, I think it's safe to say they don't necessarily have a franchise quarterback at the moment. They do have a game wrecker in Max Crosby, and we saw Brock Bowers just absolutely balling out. He was in that Offensive Rookie of the Year conversation. But Josh, getting a look at your mock here, you have them getting a little bit of speed with Ted McMillan.
Yeah, if you're at the dance and you don't have a partner at the quarterback position, you go in a different direction. Brock Bowers was fantastic this season. He was the best rookie tight end that we've seen. Obviously, that bears out in the statistics. So now you add Tedero McMillan, who also has tremendous size. Now you have a couple of outlets for whoever that quarterback ends up being. You can just throw the ball up and let him go get it because you've got some size in very key positions. I think that's got to be the path for success in this offense as you're moving forward, as you're trying to figure out the quarterback position. So if you can't figure out the quarterback position the way that you want to, at least give them a couple of pass catchers that are able to create their own opportunities.
Yeah, I agree with Josh there that this is a situation that is not actually that bad for a quarterback that comes in there, but their options are going to be tied at the quarterback position. But you have a very young and very good offensive line. You have a Brock Bowers who is a true #1 tight end, and you have the ability to get a true #1 wide receiver on the outside that makes a very dynamic 1-2 punch there for whoever is the quarterback. So, if you're not going to have the #1 overall pick at quarterback, you're not going to have this franchise guy, well, at least make the situation desirable. So if someone's hitting free agency next year, if someone's available for trade next offseason, they may say, hey, I want to go to Las Vegas and play for the Raiders.
Kirk Cousins, maybe?
Yeah.
Sam Darnold? I don't know. Like, who comes to mind when you're talking about...
I'm not saying this offseason. There's not a lot of available this offseason. I'm saying maybe like Dak next offseason or someone.
Remember when I said that? I said that, but I digress. We don't have time to get into that because James wants us to stay on topic here. Let's move on and talk about the Ben Johnson era out in Chicago. We saw him be introduced earlier today. He is clearly very excited to be taking over the Chicago Bears. And guys, when we think about him, right, he's the offensive coordinator coming from Detroit. So naturally the pairing between him and Caleb Williams is what comes to the forefront. But Josh, this is a Chicago defense that needs some work too. So if you're Ben Johnson, how are you approaching your first draft? The Bears pick early in that first round. How should he be approaching that pick?
If he wants to build the Bears roster in the image of the Lions roster, he's going to address the offensive line. He's going to address the defensive line. In an article on CBSSports.com right now, you can actually read what I believe is the perfect draft plan for Ben Johnson and the Bears, and that's potentially a little bit of overkill. I've got them taking 2 offensive linemen, 2 defensive linemen in the top 100 overall picks. But I think when you look at how the Lions have found success since he has been there, since Dan Campbell has been there, it has been the offensive and the defensive lines. They've had high quality across the board. Of course, not so much this year because of the injuries that played a role. But I think that's what he's going to ultimately want to do now that he's the head coach of the Chicago Bears, getting to make his own roster construction decisions. James Pierce, I tend to think that there's like 7 or 8 bona fide blue chip talents in this draft class. So who are those next couple of players? I think Pierce has shown a high level of explosion, good first step quickness, had the highest pressure rate in college football this past year. So as you're trying to start the Ben Johnson era on a positive note, put him in there across from Montez Sweat and let those 2 operate and potentially apply a little bit of pressure on the opposing quarterback.
Yep, I love it. And I think Pierce is listed at 245 unofficially. We'll find out as we get through the draft process, but he plays much bigger than that. We saw those clips, how juiced up he is. And you might want to think at this spot, hey, let's take Ashton Jeanty and get Jahmyr Gibbs 2.0. But I think to Josh's point, if you're going to follow the Lions blueprint, which has been incredibly successful these last 2 years, you're going to beef up the interior offensive and defensive lines, get some edge rush help from Montez Sweat, and then work your way out from there. I love this approach, and I think Caleb Williams showed glimpses of being really good under some trying circumstances last year. You get him Ben Johnson, and he's already worth 1.5 skill position players just by the plays he's dialing up for you. So I'm absolutely on board with James Pierce here.
And while Ashton Jeanty would be awesome and be so much fun to watch that offense, this is a great running back class too. You can go find a guy in the 2nd round. You can find a guy in the 3rd round if you're the Chicago Bears to be that kind of 1-2 punch in the Dave Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs that Ben Johnson had in Detroit. You ain't going to find too many starting tackles in the 2nd and 3rd round though in this draft class. So I think that's where I'm looking first, offensive tackle after that defensive line, because it's very deep along the defensive line. So maybe your offensive tackle round 1, D-line round 2, because there are probably still going to be guys available that can play for you.
Yeah, Ryan Wilson, we're saving Ashton Jeanty for the number 12 pick to the Dallas Cowboys.
I was going to say,
leave it alone.
You guys are talking to a Cowboys fan. You cannot be putting Ashton Jeanty with other teams outside of the Dallas Cowboys. We appreciate it, guys. Hang tight because we're going to go through the rest of Josh Edwards' mock. This is how he sees 11 through 20 shaking out.
Look at that 12
potentially,
spot.
yeah, the Dolphins going with the tight end route. We're going to talk more about it coming up, and then also what some of the other playoff teams' needs are. That is all coming up ahead right here on CBS Sports HQ.
Back here on CBS Sports HQ, we are going through our Josh Edwards mock draft. We already addressed the top 10 picks, so we're going now 11 on. And I just want to set the tone here. That 11th pick belongs to the Dolphins. Josh Edwards has them taking Tyler Warren out of Penn State with that pick there at number 13, I should say. So we are moving along in the draft.
Yeah, now we're going to look at some of the teams that just recently got bounced in the playoffs and what their draft needs are and what that looks like. And that brings us to the Texans. They are in a very winnable division in the AFC South. And Josh, you have them going with Walter Nolan, and this is a Texans team where their defense has been the bright spot. Tell us more about that connection with Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. How do you see him fitting in there with those guys?
Just think about D'Amico Ryans and his past with the 49ers. They have traditionally invested in the defensive line. They value depth. They value athleticism. They value length among that unit. So when I looked at what they tried to do last year, trying to make a move for Eric Armstead, ultimately falling short, I think Walter Nolan is a player that still has a little bit of untapped potential. So if your team's sitting in the back half of the 1st round, you're coming off a inspiring playoff performance, although the regular season may not have gone as you had hoped. I think Nolan is a player that could give you a little bit more at the next level. You put him there next to Will Anderson, a Danielle Hunter, give him some of those one-on-one opportunities. Now I think you're able to create a little bit more pressure and turn the ball over and get it back to C.J. Stroud in that offense.
This is one of my favorite fits in the entire 1st round. This pairing, DT, explosive, young, interior defensive lineman, is perfect for those 2 dynamic edge rushers there in Houston. And they don't blitz a lot, so they get a lot of play out of those interior guys, stunting, slanting, those sort of things. They don't need to do that with a guy like Walter Nolan. He can get upfield, get into the backfield all on his own. The only question is, I'm not sure if he makes it to 25 at this rate. He's got a guy that's going to blow up the combine. I think he could go even higher.
Wow, how high?
I think he could go top 15.
Okay, well.
I love spicy takes like that. Let's jump ahead and talk about the Rams. Josh, with their pick, you have them taking Josh Simmons, the offensive tackle. And Ryan, it's interesting when we talk about Josh Simmons, a guy who had so much upside. I know on the article that Josh wrote, it said that he could potentially be the top left tackle in this class if it wasn't for that season-ending knee injury that he dealt with in October. How do you see him stepping into a Rams offensive line that I think did a good job this season of protecting Matt Stafford, but an offensive line can always get better?
Yeah, they're going to have some guys up for free agency, so they need to fill those needs. They've done a great job of finding value later in the draft along the offensive line. Steve Avila was a second-round pick, and he starts on the interior when he's healthy, but typically those guys have been drafted a little later. If Josh Simmons is there, it makes sense. I'm a little hesitant because he had the ACL in that Oregon game, and prior to that, and Josh and I just talked about this on with the first pick, he played at San Diego State, so there's not a lot of tape against him against elite talent. That with the compound with the fact that he has the ACL, so he probably won't be ready to start the season. Even if he is healthy, do you want to throw him out there with that lack of experience? So I understand the pick. I get it here. But as I scale the mock draft here, my guy Josh is crushing Kelvin Banks Jr. He has him still on the board. I'm taking Kelvin Banks Jr. and feeling great about it. You start him at left tackle. Perhaps you can start him at right tackle, depending on what your needs are. And then you don't have to worry about the injury concern or the lack of experience. But I think to Josh's other point, Josh Simmons, had he been healthy, would certainly be in that conversation for one of the first tackles off the board.
All right, let's go to the Ravens coming off a heartbreaker against the Bills. And this was a defense that's interesting, right? Because there were questions about this defense at the start of the season, and it felt like they were surging at the right time, Josh. And you have them going the edge route in your latest mock.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to matter who they have at the edge rusher position. They're always going to get production out of that player, whether it's Kyle Van Noy. In the past, they've gone Zadarius Smith, Pernell McPhee on day 2 of the NFL draft and gotten great production from those players. So it just seems like whoever they put into that role is ultimately going to succeed. In this instance, I have them taking Nick Scorton, the pass rusher from Texas A&M. Very powerful player. I think you have to have a high baseline of power to be a successful edge rusher in today's NFL. So you plug him into that defense, allow him to push the pocket a little bit next to Justin Madubuike and some of the other talent that they've assembled. I just think it's good value for Baltimore at this stage of the first round.
Yeah, I mean, we know Baltimore is known for their defense historically, and adding Nick into the mix there just feels very scary, and I want to move on. So let's move on and talk about another very talented defensive player. We're going Lions next. They pick at 28. Josh, you have them taking Landon Jackson, the edge rusher. And it's interesting, Mike, I'll come to you on this topic because, you know, Detroit just added Zadarius Smith, the well-traveled man in that division at this point, but you can always do some help. So how can Landon be a compliment? Because remember, Aiden Hutchinson is the dominant guy there too.
Yeah, he can be versatile. The big thing about Landon Jackson is that 6'7", high 200-pound range. He could play inside or outside, 3-4 defensive end, a lot like a guy in John Kaminsky, who was unfortunately injured this past year for him, but did a lot the year prior. So we saw how thin that defensive line got down the stretch, and they have a lot of guys hitting free agency. I think that's the position the Lions are going to have to attack in this first round if they want to keep that success that we saw early on the season defensively.
Yeah, I was going to say depth, a huge thing for them because we saw, like, you know, the all-pro list of players on the injury list towards the end of the season. All right, Mike. Fellas, we certainly appreciated going down the very latest mock draft from Josh Edwards. And just a reminder, you can also find that over on CBSSports.com.
And make sure you check out With the First Pick podcast. You can scan that QR code on your screen or listen wherever you get your podcasts.